For years, the white waitress had quietly worked double shifts at a small diner in Seattle, earning just enough to cover her living expenses. Yet the weariness had never caused her to close her heart. On that cold, rainy night, when she saw three little triplet girls huddled outside, their clothes drenched, she immediately pulled them in, warmed them up, and gave them a full meal. She had no idea. Across the street, a millionaire was watching her every gesture. And that man was the father of the three children. From that moment on, the door to a world beyond her imagination began to open. Rain poured down on Fremont Street, as if the sky had swallowed every color and decided to return it all in a dull gray shroud. The streets were sparse, the streetlights flickering between veils of steam rising from the frozen asphalt. Inside the narrow Blue Lantern diner, warm golden light spilled across the streaks on old wooden tables, where Emily Hart was still bent over, wiping away the last drops of coffee from the evening shift. She had stood behind this counter for 7 years, her sneakers worn at the heels from endless steps, her hands calloused from carrying trays and scrubbing surfaces. Day after day, week after week, Emily worked herself to exhaustion, saving every tip to pay the rent on her small apartment in Ballard and send a little money to her elderly parents in Oregon. On nights as weary as this, most staff wished only to lock up quickly, go home, and forget the faces of strangers. But Emily wasn't that kind of person. When the clock edged toward 11:30, she lifted her head for a moment to glance out the window only to freeze. Out there, beneath the diner's small awning, 3 tiny figures huddled together into one. Their clothes were soaked through, hair plastered to their foreheads, their thin shoulders trembling in steady rhythm. No umbrella, no bag, no sign of an adult nearby. Just 3 little girls identical down to every feature clinging tightly to one another against the cold. Emily set the rag down and hurried to the door. A rush of wind and rain hit her face, the chill slicing through her thin sweater. The small faces turned upward, wide eyes filled with both wariness and desperation. She didn't ask questions, just gave a small nod and eased the door open wider. Warmth from inside spilled out like an unspoken invitation. In her own life, Emily had once known what it was to wait for someone who would never show up. That feeling had carved itself into her memory like an invisible scar. And now, seeing these 3 children, that memory returned so vivid she could not turn her back and walk away. Minutes later, the girls were wrapped in clean cotton towels, sitting close together at a table near the kitchen. Emily stepped behind the counter, set a pot of milk on the stove, dropped in pieces of dark chocolate, and stirred until a rich, velvety aroma filled the room. On the griddle, slices of bread spread with butter and honey began to toast, releasing a sweet, comforting scent. It was her grandmother's recipe, a rainy day meal, simple yet enough to warm a heart. She carried the tray over, setting before each child a steaming mug of hot chocolate and a plate of golden toast. No pressing questions, no demands, just the quiet, steady presence of kindness. 3 small pairs of hands reached out slowly, the heat from the mug seeping into their skin, chasing away the cold that had settled into their bones. Outside, the rain still fell in even rhythm, splattering into tiny beads against the glass. Across the street, inside a black Cadillac SUV tucked beneath the shadow of a tree, a man was watching it all. He sat still, hands resting on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the scene inside the diner. Those 3 little girls, Lily, Rose, and Daisy, were his daughters. Lucas Barrett had seen all kinds of people in his life, sycophants who fawned over money, opportunists who twisted kindness to serve their own ends, and those who calculated every step to get closer to him. But this woman with her tousled brown hair and faded apron didn't know who he was, nor did she seem to want anything from his children. She simply helped them, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. In the car, Lucas frowned. He had only meant for his daughters to wait near the diner for a few minutes while he handled an urgent business call. But this situation and this woman had shattered the script he had imagined. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, the streetlights blurring through the sheet of water. Inside the diner, Emily leaned down to adjust the towel around the youngest girl's shoulders, offering a faint smile. Lucas knew he couldn't drive away without learning more about her. What he could not yet imagine was that this brief moment would mark the beginning of a chain of events powerful enough to change both their lives. Could a chance rainy night open the door to an entirely new world?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
Lucas Barrett was not the kind of man easily swayed by small things. His entire career had been built on iron discipline and cold, calculated decisions, stripping away any trace of emotion. He was used to seeing the world in numbers, balance sheets, and lines of profit. But the image from the previous rainy night, his 3 triplet daughters cradled in the arms of a stranger, their hair being dried with a clean towel as they ate slices of golden toast, had etched itself into his mind like an indelible stain. He had only planned to let Lily, Rose, and Daisy sit near the diner for 10 minutes, just enough time to finish a call with a Japanese business partner. It was an important deal worth millions, the kind of thing that, in Lucas's mind, always came before anything else. But when he returned, the sight before him made his steps slow. Emily, the waitress in a faded apron, was crouched to their level, her smile gentle, her hands patiently brushing each drop of rain from their small heads. There was no sign of haste, no probing glance, no calculation. On the drive home with his daughters, Lucas remained silent, but in his mind a question replayed over and over. Who was that woman? And why did her actions, a man who didn't believe in unconditional kindness, make him feel so challenged? The next morning, as Emily stepped out of the diner after a long shift, the warmth of a takeaway coffee still lingering in her hands, a figure appeared at the door. A blonde woman in a black leather coat entered with the assured gait of someone who knew exactly why she was there. Natalie, Lucas's longtime assistant, produced a business card, simple yet elegant, bearing only the name Barrett Estates and a phone number. Her voice was calm, as if this were nothing more than a routine appointment. Lucas Barrett wanted to meet her, today. Emily hesitated. The name, she had heard before, attached to Seattle's most luxurious buildings and real estate deals no one dared dream of touching. For reasons she couldn't quite name, she agreed. The meeting took place at a cafe on the riverbank, where large windows opened to a view of deep green water. Lucas was already there, seated at a corner table with an espresso before him. He didn't start with pleasantries, just a nod of greeting. Then he set a thick envelope on the table in the measured silence between them. Inside was an offer to work for Barrett Estates, a 6-figure salary and terms anyone in Emily's position would call a dream. Her first reaction was to laugh, not out of scorn, but at the sheer disparity between her reality and what was unfolding. She, a woman accustomed to serving coffee behind a counter, was being invited into a high-powered real estate firm with an income 10 times anything she had ever imagined. Lucas did not laugh. His gaze locked onto hers, sharp but without menace. He said he wasn't looking for a broker, wasn't looking for someone to crunch profit margins. He was looking for a person who could treat others as human beings, something he had seen her do with his 3 daughters. Emily stayed silent. The offer hung between them like a door left slightly ajar, leading into a world she had never stepped into. Deep down, she felt a strange pull, not just from the numbers in the envelope, but from the sincerity in the way he spoke about what he needed. But could an opportunity arriving so quickly, from a man who was almost a stranger, truly be an unconditional gift? Or was it the opening move in a game she didn't yet understand? Comment 1. If you think the story is good, so we know you're still here. That morning, Seattle was draped in a thin veil of mist, the skyscrapers rising as if from a sea of gray clouds. Emily stood on the sidewalk before the 50-story glass tower of Barrett Estates, the feeling of her own smallness magnified against the grandeur of its architecture. The pale sunlight reflected off the blue-tinted glass, making the entire structure gleam like a massive block of ice. The revolving doors slid open, and she stepped inside as though crossing the boundary between two worlds. The scent of freshly polished marble, the echo of footsteps on the floor, and the cool rush of air from the high-powered climate control system immediately enveloped her. Everything here was orderly, pristine, and arranged with precise intention. At the reception desk, staff in graphite-colored uniforms offered professional smiles, yet their eyes discreetly assessed her as if wondering what a woman in such a modest coat was doing there. Emily was escorted to the elevator, its doors closing without a sound. The numbers on the panel climbed steadily, and for a brief moment she caught a panoramic view of the city through the glass rooftops, streets, and the distant waters of Elliott Bay. She thought about the distance from the little diner in Fremont to this place, and realized that it wasn't measured in miles alone. Lucas's office occupied the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering an unobstructed view of all of Seattle. His desk was so immaculate it looked more like a display piece than a place where work was done. Emily received her first assignment almost as soon as she sat down, to join Lucas in project negotiations while also overseeing part of the company's community relations. A role she quickly realized would place her at the heart of decisions impacting hundreds of lives. Yet, within the very first hours, Emily could sense that not everyone welcomed her presence. Some glances carried quiet skepticism, greetings delivered with just enough politeness to remain formal, but never warm. Natalie, the blonde woman she had met the day before, no longer wore her polite smile. Instead, her expression was cool, her nods curt. The way Natalie arranged papers and double-checked meeting schedules in Emily's presence felt like the drawing of an invisible boundary. This was her domain, and Emily was merely a newcomer. The first task Lucas assigned came late that morning. A group of investors was considering canceling a project to renovate a low-income housing complex, replacing it with luxury apartment towers. Such a decision, if carried out, would force hundreds of families to leave the place they had called home for years. Lucas wanted Emily to persuade them to change their minds not with numbers alone, but through the stories and human impact bound up in this project. Holding the file in her hands, Emily could feel its weight was more than just paper. This was not simply a job, it was a test. She remembered the faces of the diner's regulars, laborers, families who counted every dollar and realized that here, their fates could be decided in a single closed-door meeting. The conference room was located in another corner of the floor, its glass walls and long mahogany table accommodating more than a dozen seats. Chairs were already in place, and the large screen displayed rows of financial charts. Emily knew she would be sitting here, next to Lucas, facing people whose financial power far exceeded anyone she had ever met. The thought filled her with both nerves and an urge to prepare every detail meticulously. Standing by the window looking down at the flow of traffic below, Emily wondered if she, a woman from a small diner, had what it would take to influence the decisions made in rooms like this. Emily stepped inside, her heartbeat more pronounced in her chest. The suit she wore was a thrift store find, carefully tailored to fit. It bore no famous label, but it was clean, neat, and, most importantly, it made her feel confident enough to sit as an equal among the powerful men in this room. Across the table, Richard Hale was already seated. His name was a fixture in financial pages, described with words like seasoned, unyielding, and always victorious. His appearance reflected it. Silver hair, combed neatly, a dark, tailored suit, hugging his frame, eyes as sharp as a blade. Beside him sat two younger associates, each with a laptop open. their spreadsheets filled with dense columns of numbers. Lucas sat to Emily's right, fingers interlaced, back straight, eyes fixed on Hale. He skipped long introductions and small talk. The air seemed to grow heavier the moment the meeting began. Hale opened by presenting his plan to demolish the aging housing complex in South Park to make way for more upscale apartment towers. He called it profit optimization, a phrase that, to the business-minded, sounded like a promise of efficiency, but to Emily's ears rang like a sentence of eviction for hundreds of families. When he finished, the room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the ceiling ventilation. Emily opened the file she had spent the last 2 nights preparing. Numbers, charts, and market scenarios were printed clearly, neatly organized. She did not rush. Her voice was low and steady. Without a tremor, she acknowledged the importance of figures in business, but then asked what the cost would be when the community protested when the media told the story of families pushed out onto the streets for the sake of profit. She cited similar cases where companies suffered reputational damage, stock price drops, and had to spend millions on lawsuits. Sliding the analysis across to Hale, she watched his eyes move swiftly over each page. Emily continued, this time offering a solution. Retain at least 40% of the units at affordable rent to qualify for the city's tax incentives. This would not only protect the community but create sustainable profits and a positive public image value far beyond immediate gains. A long silence followed. Emily could feel Lucas's gaze shift toward her. No interference, no additions. He was letting her own this moment. Outside, a few seagulls skimmed past the glass, their distant cries punctuating the taut stillness. Hale leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly on the table. His associates exchanged glances, and one pulled a laptop closer, beginning to enter new figures. It felt as though invisible walls were starting to crack. Finally, Hale closed the file and set it down. He did not smile, but the ice in his gaze had thawed. A brief nod toward Lucas, an acknowledgement that this proposal was worth considering. Without a word, Emily knew the project had shifted course. As she stepped out of the meeting room, the long, quiet corridor felt like space enough to breathe again. Light streamed through the glass, making everything appear sharper even within her. The sense of victory came not from confronting a powerful man, but from knowing that hundreds of families would not have to pack up and leave their homes. Lucas walked beside her, expression unreadable, but there was a glint at the corner of his eye, something that felt like recognition. And in this world, recognition from him was worth more than any compliment. But Emily also understood that today's win was only the first step. In a company like Barrett Estates, every success drew more eyes, and not all of them would be kind. My dear viewers, stay tuned for the next chapter that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the world. In the days following the meeting with Richard Hale, Barrett Estates took on an entirely different atmosphere. Emily began to grow accustomed to the relentless pace, calls coming one after another, files stacking high, and tense meetings stretching late into the afternoon. She was starting to feel less like an outsider looking in and more like a part of the machine itself. But that fragile sense of stability didn't last. On Monday morning, as soon as Emily stepped into the office, a strange wave of silence spread. Side conversations halted when she passed by. Eyes darted away, a few people whispering under their breath. There was something in the air, a mix of curiosity and judgment that made her steps feel heavier. On her desk lay a neatly placed white envelope. Inside was a printed copy of an email. The subject line was chillingly blunt. Internal financial report sent to journalist. At the bottom, her name and email address were printed in bold, unmistakable. A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. She knew exactly what this was. A confidential report detailing the company's finances and upcoming strategy. If leaked, it could cost Barrett Estates millions and undermine partner confidence. The sound of light footsteps came from behind. Natalie stood there, holding an identical printout. Her expression was stern, though her voice was low. She believed Emily was innocent. But in this place, trust was a luxury. No one would forgive on trust alone. Evidence was the only thing that could save someone. They didn't waste time. In a small room at the end of the hall, Natalie opened her laptop and connected to the company's server. The glow of the screen lit both of their focused faces. Lines of code, IP addresses, and access logs began to appear. Emily's eyes stayed fixed, every piece of information a puzzle piece that needed to lock into place. By retracing the digital trail, they discovered the email hadn't been sent from Emily's device, but from a shadow account created in her name, a sophisticated clone. The network path led to a secondary server hidden behind multiple layers of encryption, but the final trace appeared more clearly than they expected. Charles Denton. The name instantly thickened the air. Denton, the executive vice president, was said to have stood alongside Lucas for years. But hallway whispers told a different story. He harbored ambitions of his own and had repeatedly tried to push Lucas out of leadership. To Denton, Emily was just a new pawn on the board, easy to sacrifice, easy to blame. Natalie tilted the screen so Emily could clearly see the logs, timestamps, network addresses, and the attachment sent to a well-known financial journalist. The evidence was undeniable. Emily stared at the numbers, her first feeling one of relief she hadn't been wrong to insist she was innocent. But that was quickly replaced by a simmering anger. Someone had deliberately tried to make her the scapegoat. Outside, Barrett Estates carried on as if nothing had happened. Conference rooms glowed, phones rang steadily, employees tapped at keyboards. But Emily knew that if this wasn't exposed quickly, she would become a whispered cautionary tale in these halls. The waitress who thought she could play in the Giants' arena. They shut down the laptop, carefully storing all the data onto a secure device. Natalie handed it to Emily, her gaze no longer guarded. Between them now was a silent agreement. This had to be brought into the light, and it had to happen before Denton had time to erase the trail. Emily drew in a deep breath. Since the day she walked into this building, she had known not everyone wanted her here. But she had never imagined she'd be facing off directly against one of the most powerful figures in the company. And now, there was no turning back. Could a newcomer like her really unmask someone many rungs above her right in the heart of power? The emergency board meeting was convened the next morning, in a long room flooded with light from its large glass windows. The air was thick, as if every breath carried a trace of caution. The most powerful figures of Barrett Estates were already in their seats, and at the far end of the table sat Charles Denton, his suit immaculate, but his eyes still cold, confident in the trap he believed he had set. Emily entered without glancing left or right. In her hands, she held a thick file with a dark blue cover. When a chair was pulled out for her, she didn't sit. Instead, she set the file down on the table with a sharp thud that broke the stillness. Every eye turned to her. A few frowns flickered. Her voice was calm but rang clear. If the board intended to place blame on her, they should see this first. Her fingers flipped through each page, letting them all see the printed copies of the emails sent to the journalist, the server access logs, and the extracted network transaction records pulled directly from the company's security system. The atmosphere began to shift. Eyes that had first looked at her with suspicion slowly turned to surprise, then cooled toward Denton. His face paled, a few clumsy words of denial slipping from his lips, but his voice lacked conviction. Meanwhile, Lucas, seated at the head of the table, silently observed each detail, his eyes bright with vigilance and resolve. As Denton's words quickened in a rush to deny everything, Lucas stood. The scrape of his chair cut through the room, halting every other sound. He declared there was no need for further argument. Denton was terminated immediately, and the company would proceed with legal action for breach of security and acts causing severe damage to Barrett Estates' interests. Denton closed his briefcase and rose, but he didn't dare look anyone in the eye as he left the room. The door shut behind him, leaving behind a silence heavy with meaning. Emily drew a deep breath, feeling as if she'd just walked off a battlefield, but this time, she was the one still standing. After the meeting, Lucas asked Emily to stay. In his office, with the city sprawling beneath the clear glass walls, he didn't waste words. He told her that she had not only saved the company's reputation, but she had saved him from a blow Denton had been preparing for a long time. The look in his eyes was not just recognition, it was trust, a rare gift from him. 2 months later, Emily had become an indispensable part of Barrett Estates. The announcement of her appointment as Director of Community Relations was met with surprise by many. But instead of merely sitting at the boardroom table, she rolled up her sleeves to launch her first project, the Barrett Hart Foundation. A joint initiative, combining the company's financial resources with community networks to renovate housing in struggling neighborhoods and provide scholarships to underprivileged children. On the day the first community center opened, rare sunlight poured over Seattle. The front yard rang with laughter, silver blue ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Emily stood beside Lucas, looking at the freshly painted walls and the playground shimmering in the sunlight. A clear, joyful voice called from afar. The triplets, Lily, Rose, and Daisy, came running toward her, hair flying, cheeks flushed. They threw their arms around her, their tiny hands gripping as if afraid she might disappear. One looked up, eyes bright, and whispered that she was the best person in the world. Emily bent down, holding them tightly, the scent of sunshine and the sound of laughter blending together, erasing every distance between towering glass buildings and damp, narrow streets. Lucas stood beside her, hands in his pockets, giving a small nod. It wasn't just thanks, it was confirmation that the path they were on was the right one. She knew it had all begun with one rainy night, a cup of hot chocolate, and a simple decision not to turn her back on someone in need. But if one rainy night could change everything, what would happen when new challenges arrived? Sometimes the smallest moments hold the power to change an entire life. Emily had never imagined that a cup of hot chocolate and a warm embrace in the rain could open the door to a future she had never dared to dream of. From an anonymous waitress, she had become someone who brought homes, opportunities, and hope to hundreds of people. Emily's story reminds us that kindness doesn't need to be loud, and every act of compassion leaves a deeper mark than you might imagine. When you choose to stand on the side of what's right, no matter how hard it is, you don't just save others, you also save yourself. Thank you for staying until the end of today's story. If you believe that kindness still holds power in this world, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so more people can be inspired. Leave me a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is, so we can connect and continue spreading these healing stories every day.